I'm sure you're heartbroken that we're a minute late as the caffeine set in. Let's get going. So we walked last night all the way down to the question of this issue of discipline. At what point do you apply it and these things? While having spoken against the process of, I guess as I call it, making a fetish of it, that's not to say that obviously I'm not commending it as a need, because there's lots of stories if you actually ask around of people who only really woke up to their problems and their challenges when the church said, you better stop or else you can stop coming here. And it's that sense you hear of, well, that was the first time, and we were just talking about a story like this, that was the first time someone told me that this was that big of a problem. And, the grown-ups are usually emotionally in terms of their own sins, they act like children in that sense. And I use those analogies a lot because I have them, but also because it's true. If we think we can get away with it, you don't care if you know the parent knows that you know, right? If you know your parents are looking the other way and you're getting away with stuff, you don't care. Like, you just want to get away with it. But when your parent says you can't do that, and they apply loving discipline in your life when you're a child, then you go, all right, I got to figure out another way to live, or this is not going to be very exciting. But I think, again, the problem is whenever you act as if the disciplining spirit is what corrects them. As if it's that kind of showing the kid the belt all the time model. At some point, the kid just hates you and hates the belt. Versus them knowing that you're loving and shepherding and caring for them, and implied in that is you're really callous to this problem in your life, and it's serious. And I don't just mean you're grumpy sometimes. I mean, like, there's something serious, like, there's a case of my friend who's a pastor in South Florida who had an elder in his church that used to speak very negatively of his wife in private, when just he'd come to the elder meeting or something, and his wife would text or something, and he'd be like, oh God, she's so annoying sometimes. And he just did that kind of like, he thought he was in the locker room and he could talk this way. And my friend's pastor, as his pastor, started to dig into this, and he found there's just all kinds of like tension and problems and fighting, and he just went after him. He just said, one, you're an elder, you're supposed to be a standard above. And he says, nothing's supposed to be perfect, but even our committee, or our session meeting, to be talking that way is inappropriate. I understand blowing off steam and just you say the wrong thing one time, a few times, if you run on the mouth, but he says, you seem to do this a lot. And he just kept going, and the guy was relatively unrepentant about this. He's like, look, it's hard, man, whatever. It's kind of the whole, like, I don't want to talk about a thing. And he just said, look, how about you need to actually step down as an elder? The guy said, what? This whole thing. And at that point, he woke up. He was like, all right, wait, why? And the guy just said, you're abusing your marriage. I'm not saying, and he said, I'm not taking her side, I'm not taking your side. I'm saying you're both sinners and you're both acting like it right now, really bad. And in the language he uses, you're searing your conscience against this. You're not letting the part of you that knows that you shouldn't be acting this way, the place where the Spirit will convict. You're muting, you're hitting the mute button on that point, and you're letting your own ego run the show. So, and he said, in this slide here, point here, he said, you guys haven't moved to the point where this is a public scandal where everyone sees you. You guys haven't started a yelling fight at each other at like the potluck dinner and everyone knows you guys are having trouble or something. He said, but it's public enough where we see this. He says, we see you guys eye roll at each other and act like knuckleheads. And he said, how about we get after this before one of you leaves or has an affair or does something really inappropriate. And they did. And last I heard, everything's great. They're not perfect, but each of them had to deal with anger issues and harboring, nursing grievances and stuff for long periods of time. And apparently they're doing it. So that's discipline, though. And if it's done well, it feels like you're stepping in on a friend. It feels like you're shepherding. It feels like you're saying, no, seriously, you can't do this. And it won't be perfect. But as I was saying last night, if you're conflict averse, you won't last in ministry. Now you don't need to be you don't need to be, what's the opposite of that? Conflict. You don't need to be like eager for it. But if you're not willing to walk, to look someone in the eye and say, no, this is not right, but you feel bad about that, and you say, therefore you just say, no, you're good, man. Jesus loves you. Then you don't have that speak the truth in love factor. The other side of that as well is some of you will be fine with saying that, saying conflict, potential things, potentially conflicting things. But others of you need to work on the relational side of this. Meaning, if you can't, as I was joking last night, if you can't half remember the person's name, it's probably not the time to start telling them what to do, discipline-wise. Labor towards that first. And it takes a long, long time. But I think there's a wisdom in how to do it. This is one of those things that we can't teach you in seminary because there is no way to write a book on how to do this perfectly. Because so much of it is who's your people? What do you have going on? What's your culture? What's the specific situation you're dealing with? The best advice on this, on how to learn this, is hang out with old pastors. Because they've seen it all and they've done it all and they know what they're doing. And hang out with old wise people that have lasted and not killed themselves on this. And that goes for all levels of ministry, by the way. But in particular, if you're going to be in the position of deciding discipline issues, don't do it on your own. And hear everything. I have one more story just to give you an example of how bad this could be if you're not careful. In a church I was in Orlando for a while when I was in seminary, the wife of a family decided she was going to up and leave. She's tired of it. And she didn't really want to talk about it. She just wanted to leave. And the church, of course, only knowing that information, in some ways they're not responsible because they only knew what they knew. But they just kind of went at it kind of like straight down the line, by the books. Okay, she's leaving. This is a challenge. They asked her to come in and talk and stuff like that. And they could tell something was being held back, but they said, well, if you're leaving your husband just out of nothing, then that's a problem. And they were right to the point where they were ready to say, she's under discipline. And then their teenage daughter came in and said, if you can't tell by now, there's massive abuse going on by my dad to the family. Like my mom, his wife, is scared to death to say anything. I said, she has all the signs of quaking in her boots around him. And it was like the light bulbs go off and oh crap. And it was like this moment where they didn't stop and start asking questions and start even using their intuition to probe things and they all said, we could kind of tell something was wrong. He was halfway a bully all the time. And no one stopped and said, are you fully a bully when you get home? Are you just holding back with us? And so they put him under discipline. And I don't know the outcome of that story. It was about 15 years ago. But that being said, you hear these, again, get around people that have the war wounds and the stories and they've seen everything. Because that's the only way to pick this up and learn it. You're not going to get this in a book. You got to figure out how to shepherd. And that's a hard thing. So, okay. Now, the big thing here, as I was saying last night, is that when you get the list of the four, the one holy, Catholic, apostolic, and then you line them up over against the reformational ones of preaching, sacraments, and discipline, what I would say is, of course, these are meant to be, I think, in tension. In that sense of now, not yet. In that sense of we are one and holy and Catholic and apostolic, but to the extent that we are not yet capable of being those things in full measure, we need preaching and sacraments and occasionally discipline in the negative sense to restore us to times where we then seek more oneness and those things. Too far. So you might say the church is one holy and Catholic and apostolic, and it needs preaching and sacraments and discipline to keep being renewed and refreshed and reformed back to that the calling of what we're supposed to be. You might, another way of putting them, these are held in dialectic, meaning what are you preaching and administering sacraments towards? A body that is one, holy, and Catholic and apostolic. But how do you know if you've achieved that, or if you're on the right road, you're on the right path? By holding people to account, by preaching to them, shepherding them, teaching them, all that stuff. So one is more, we instinctively talk about who I am and what I do as a distinction. So, like, I am this, this is how I am, but what I'm doing is I'm heading towards this goal. You could even use an exercise metaphor if you wanted to. What I am is halfway in shape, but I need to be in better shape to do a 5K run or something like that. There's an improvement factor. I'm very nervous about that language though, because it sounds Pelagian at a corporate level at some point. The fact is we are one, we are holy, and we are Catholic and apostolic in God's eyes. The problem is between the cross and the life to come, there is this tension of yet the old man hangs on, and yet sin abides, and yet it is gone and conquered and dead, yet it seems to feel like a thorn in the flesh. That individual reality you and I intuit and get very easily. What I'm saying is there's a corporate reality to that as well in the church. And that therefore all the things that you would assume about yourself, you're going to see in the church. You're going to see the capacity for wonderful things, amazing things, biblical things, truth, sanctification, all those things, and yet you're still a sinner and the church is still a sinful corporate reality at the visible level. It's this reason, by the way, that we were talking about this last night a bit, that during the Reformation, they started talking about the difference between the visible and the invisible church. The visible is the one that feels that tension, and that the invisible is invisible to us, but visible to God alone. In fact, that might be the best way to put it, is visible to us and visible to God. Because invisible makes it sound like it's some kind of ghost or some kind of abstract concept. It's more, there's the church we see on Sunday, and then there's the church that God sees, spotless in the bride, that is the one that are his people. And the one we see is full of tares and wheat. It's full of people that are on the journey to sanctification, and yet not yet arrived. But the one whom God, the church that God sees are his flock, his people, the one who knows his voice, all those things. And of course, God is outside of time, as we like to say. Therefore, he can see all of his people throughout time and space, whereas we only see the knuckleheads right in front of us. So there's always this deep sense you want to understand the church to whom you're ministering. As I was saying last night, Protestants don't tend to talk about the doctrine of the church, but I think if you don't have a strong doctrine of the church in terms of the ministry focus, you're going to get out over your skis, because the fact is there's a couple things that a strong doctrine of the church gets you, in particular with these couple of concepts. One is, if you understand who the church is and who is governing it, you stop thinking of yourself as a little Messiah. If it's Christ's church, his bride, the one whom he has died for and ransomed, and he sees his people, you stop thinking of yourself as the thing holding it together. Rather, you are the shepherd who is appointed for this time, this season, to shepherd this group right now. And what that means is you're able to stop thinking so much and so highly of yourself. I mean, one of the things that we talk about a lot in at least the practical side of classes, is burnout. People burn out because they think they're Jesus. They don't burn out because they're lazy. You burn out because you think you can't take a rest. You can't take a vacation. You have to answer every email within a certain amount of time, and you got to answer all the calls, and you got to show up to everyone's Little League game, and you've got to baptize everyone, do every wedding possible. And at some point there is a truth that you got to put your nose to the grindstone. But at some point you start to feel that if you take a day off, Jesus takes a day off. And the point of Sabbath is you ain't Jesus, and so take a rest. You are the one to be ministered to as well. You have to think of ways to do that because very often you're on Sunday, as they say, so you got to figure out other days to take rests. But there are times you have to learn strategies to walk away and say, I'm on vacation, actually, I'm dead physically, and I need a break, and no, I will not answer things, and I can't be everywhere. And if you're that reliant on me to be there, then you need to consider Jesus, not me. And that's the reality, is burnout happens because we think we're the ones that are holding it. But if you realize that the church is the one whom Christ died for, it is his bride, then he has both raised up pastors and leaders and teachers and counselors and all these things throughout the centuries, and he will do it after you're dead. So he doesn't need you, need being the key word, but he has called you and has called you for a time to do these things for his people. It also keeps you, I think, on the straight and narrow in terms of the good intention that can get kind of out too far, which is to be innovative. Everybody wants to be innovative and relevant and right now and figure out how they're going to fix things in their neighborhood, their street, or in the 21st century. And you just, I mean, in my experience as a historian, the people that actually managed to do that didn't set out to do it. And if you're just faithful with what is in front of you, with the flock you're given, God sees that. There's an old famous line from the 17th century, actually, 1600s. Preach the gospel, die, and be forgotten. And there's just, it's Zinzendorf that says that. And ironically, we still remember his name. But still, I mean, it's a good line because the whole point is God sees what's going on. You may not get accolades in this life, but that's not the point. But a faithful preaching and life of sacraments and the church has its goal towards being one holy Catholic and apostolic. Yes, sir.
Just one quick question. You know, you've heard of the fivefold ministry, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering why, do you think preaching and teaching is the same thing?
Yes and no. Preaching is a bit more thicker, has a broader shoulders, because it's also exhorting and pointing and directing. Whereas teaching, which in the modern world it's very easy to distinguish as like a Sunday school or Bible study, will have exhortation and encouragement and things like that, of course. But it's more. It does feel like two sides of the same coin, but it's not. I guess is the way. But the teaching ministry is designed to equip them to be prepared to understand and grasp and feel the weight of the preaching, if that makes sense. Let me put it this way: I can teach this whole weekend, and I'll be physically a little bit tired, but I won't be emotionally tired because I feel like teaching is where my calling is. If I preach for 25 to 35 minutes, I'm exhausted. Because there's this sense of like I've got to get everything in there for everybody and exhort everybody, and there's this sense, I don't know what it is. Whereas I know pastors that feel the opposite. They're like, I can preach my brains out 5 days a week. Maybe not, you know what I mean, but they love that every week. But when if they have to teach like a long form Sunday school or session, they find that draining over time. And I don't know what that is, but it is slightly different. Though, one friend of mine put it, sermon, if you preach every week, they said it's like you give birth on Sunday and you find out you're pregnant again on Monday. That's what a sermon feels like when you have to do it every week. And I can see that. But that's the people that are called to preach are those who like speaking to the whole flock. They love speaking to multiple generations at the same time, multiple contexts, men and women, all this type of stuff. I mean, when I'm speaking to y'all are very diverse in terms of your backgrounds and all those types of things, but you're all kind of the same people in the sense that you want to know deeper stuff for equipping for ministry. So I can use more jargon, I can go long and down stuff like this. I mean, I would never do this in a church setting like a sermon. Yeah.
Right, are we saying that what the church needs, what the church does, preaching, sacraments, and discipline, is that a Reformation insight, or?
More of I use this analogy occasionally. It was like that bumper in the bowling alley model. It's a protective, because by the end of the Middle Ages, the Roman Catholic Church had gotten to the point where it saw itself as the full embodiment of what it means to be one and holy in these things. They were essentially immune to correction, because we're the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. We're spotless. Like, they had this kind of over-realized sense of their own authority. And what the Reformation realizes is there has to be a constant renewal, return, and a call back to times when the church gets lost in its own way. Much in the same way that Israel, right before the exile, thinks that they're immune. And then this is what Jeremiah says: "Don't say the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. God will cast it down." What does that phrase mean? I think it's Jeremiah 7. It's people walking around like, we got the temple. God said this will never go away. We're not going anywhere. And Jeremiah's like, yeah, you are. And they do. And it's that sense in the Reformation of, you've been saying the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the church, the Holy Catholic Church, and you've lost your way. Therefore, the thing that calls us back is regular preaching, listening to the word, being corrected by it, and those types of things, yeah. Because, this happens a lot in churches as well. This certainly happened in the Middle Ages. A church goes astray not simply because of the leadership. Sometimes there is a gravitational or a undertow current within the lay folk where they are just dramatically changing the culture to the point that the leadership loses all power and voice. A student of mine that lives in Orlando right now was telling me this last week. He was saying that he was at a church where one lay person who got up to the point of leadership, became an elder, unordained, untrained, was the wealthiest person in the church, and suddenly it was his church. He was directing everything. They had great ideas of what they wanted to do. Nope, not doing it. Or they didn't want to do something. Hey, I really want to do this. Okay, I guess we're doing that. Like, this whole sense of he was able to drive it. And in that sense, the church was unreformable. It was, you couldn't apply medicine because it's whatever that man wanted. And the church has died. It's down to like 30 people, he said, so he left. And he confronted the elder, and the guy said, yeah, it's kind of my church. He says, I really had a vision. He had all these sanctimonious crap tone words for it. It's my vision, I had a real passion. It was laid on my heart. It's like, Like, is that why it shrunk from a healthy church to an unhealthy church of people who are scared of you? That kind of thing. And, that's the problem, is he was allowed to not be correctable, or if that's a word. He was allowed to sort of run on and think that his vision was holy and apostolic. So it just goes to show, it's not just the Catholic Church that does this. The Protestant church as a whole, all of us in our various denominations, always have checks and balances. And when a church does not have those, there are problems. Yes, sir.
Yeah, obviously, you said that they don't talk that the Protestant, you're not gonna find any books about the church, like you said.
At least on their own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I was saying, is that because the first time I hear the word church is when Jesus said, in the New Testament, I'm gonna build my church here.
Yeah.
That's the first, is that me?
Well, yes and no. I think Protestants, the word I use a lot is allergic. I think Protestants are allergic to too much talk of the church because it feels like buildings and structures and power, and I'm the pastor and I'm in charge, and we have this sense, and particularly since the American world came along and its democracy and my vote and my voice, all of which are good things. We don't like. If I were to say, hey, let's go to church, the instinct of someone would say, well, not the building, right? You don't mean that building, not that group, and not this. It's like, at some point, again, we sort of abstract what it means to be the church. A lot of you will have people who struggle with even the idea of why you should go. Why not just listen to a sermon on podcast and stay home, we get some extra sleep. Now, in a world like ours, I'm actually very much in favor of good, strong preaching on TV. Now, a lot of stuff on TV isn't good, strong preaching, but if it is, the reason why is there are plenty of stories of people that would not have darkened the door of a church, but they happened to fall on that channel and heard the gospel, and later became members of churches. But that being said, most folks just, yeah, their world is me and Jesus, and because of that, I might be a member of a church. But I think the model the church holds out is Jesus does call you, but then he then calls you to a life of discipleship and fellowship with others. And at the very least, you need something that is more than you and your personal relationship with Jesus. Maybe need is the wrong word. You only need Jesus, but in that sense, the thief on the cross didn't have time for fellowship groups. You only need Jesus, but what he gives you is feeding and shepherding throughout your life, and one of the things he uses is other people to do it. And so, this is classic out of Paul. We don't say to one part of the body, "I don't need you," which is very much what's going on here. So, to that point, actually, what we're saying is, this is going fast. What is the relationship of the believer in the church? It's a natural question. How do they relate? And the answer is, I'm just going to be very simple. The problem right now in the modern world is individualism. I think you do need to be on guard for this a little bit. There is this sense in which everyone feels immediately led, immediately empowered, and they need no one else. I mean, that's just the modern world and how we interact with each other to begin with. Don't tell me, don't tread on me, don't tell me what to do kind of people in North America. My British, very, very posh British PhD supervisor once said, he said, "Ryan, all you Americans, I don't care where you're from, you're all Texans." He goes, you all have 6-shooters and you're ready to tell everybody, "Don't tell me what to do." And I said, okay, I can see that. And he's right on some level, but and I think that is part of the challenge of the people that you're ministering to is they are very individualistic and they don't like demands placed on them, and they want to have their say. Don't believe me? Have a building campaign. You will find out everybody's opinion as to what color and shade and length of carpet and style of furniture that you could possibly. That's just at the aesthetics level. Just try that. And you'll see it. And you can do it on small levels too. That same pastor in South Florida, he inherited a church that the pastor had been there for 30 years. And they apparently had thrown almost nothing away for 30 years. They had like old flyers and bulletins from the late 1980s. And they cleaned out the closets and tossed this stuff. There's absolutely no reason to keep this thing. They recycled it and everything. People got, one family got so mad they left because they threw away old bulletins. That's the stuff you're dealing with. It's like you're dealing with a bunch of wily sinners sometimes. And as my old preaching professor used to say, there's times you knuckle under and say, "Yes, ma'am, yes, sir," and you let them kind of have their opinions, and you don't abuse the flock for the sake of your own authority. But there's other times where you say, you don't run the show, the tail doesn't wag the dog here. And we asked him for examples on that. And he just said, he actually had a good one. He said, if you're not inclined, he was talking to mostly men here, he said, if you're going to preach, you're not inclined to wear a tie, and everyone is used to their pastor wearing a tie, and they ask you to please wear a tie, don't get feisty, put on a tie. That was his comment, at least. I disagree with that necessarily, but that was his example. He just said, we're talking about ticky-tack stuff that doesn't bother you, do it. He said, however, notice the difference between this. If you arrive in at 9:15 on Monday morning or Tuesday morning because you had coffee with somebody, or heaven forbid you spent time with your family, and someone's there waiting and they said, "Well, Pastor, you're late." He said, tell them, look at them and say, "Look, I understand you might wonder where I am, but I actually don't answer to you, I answer to God. And I answer to the leadership here in this church, and I'm going to actually show up probably at 10:30 for the rest of the week." That was his response. I wouldn't necessarily counsel you to say that, but his response is, there's times you draw that line and say, you're not going to tell me, you're not going to even passive-aggressively point out to me that you're keeping tabs. And he said, however, if it's a matter of something that doesn't bother you, do it. And So, for example, the what you wear on Sunday thing, sometimes that is that control thing. The old people want you to look like the old people in that sense. Sometimes it's not. So my pastor in my church, he's put on a tie lately because he just was like, all right, because I wear a collar and a slide and like khakis all the time anyway. The tie is just one extra step. And he goes, it's dumb, it's probably an idol, but you don't go, poke the bear every time. And he said, I've got other fights to fight, so he did. And I, of course, that'd be perfectly impossible to wear a tie for me. So I would nail 95 theses to the door if they asked me to wear a tie. Yeah.
Would you separate some of this decision making, and even from the church that in history that when it's just a preference that doesn't seem to hinder mission, that's something that you
Yeah.
would say, I'm not gonna poke that bear or
Yeah.
that beast, but when it's a preference that directly hinders
Yeah.
the mission of the community is when you have to lead and say,
Yeah.
absolutely not. And that makes the tie thing can sit on either side of that.
Absolutely right, which is why, and I'm thinking of you and some of the stuff we talked about, which is if you're making a small number of people happy, but the majority of families that you'd want to reach would find you stiff and stuffy, and they wouldn't even now that's their own idols in that sense. It's amazing to me how much stock people put in what you wear, by the way. It doesn't make any sense to me. People sometimes complain that I don't dress up, and I always say, well, find me a verse that tells me that clothes make the man, and I'll start dressing a certain way. I said most of the only times the Bible mentions clothes, it talks about vanity. So that doesn't give me any friends, but yeah.
Can you speak to a little to individualism for people who think that they don't necessarily need to join a local church?
Yeah.
I grew up in a homeschooling community.
Sure.
We're just going to start our own house church.
Yeah.
Is that wrong, or is
Yes.
okay?
But not the wrongest wrong possible, to sound like Dr. Seuss. It said, is it wrong to not want to join a local community and just do your own house church? Yes, because what you see throughout the course of the New Testament is you have things that begin functioning that look like house churches. But by the end, you're appointing overseers in the establishment of what we would call the church. This is what Paul's doing. He's calling Titus and Timothy to be careful and make certain judgments as to who they're appointing. And I've yet to see there is a group of local house churches, one of which is run by an alumni of this campus. That's a bit different though, because it's more of a network of house churches, and they're really trying to reach, it's more of a mission. They're trying to reach folks that would not want to go to a building that looks like a church, but they'll show up at your house on Sunday if you invite them over for a study. That's a different thing. What I've found in the homeschooling leaning community is more of a elevation of the family above the church, and the family therefore usurps the body. And I don't find that anywhere in Scripture. In fact, when you get to Ephesians, Paul will actually use the church's structures to correct the family and say, husbands, you better act this way, wives, children, all down the line. And so if you're a house church and the family does its own kind of thing, or other families, you just have created at times a political nightmare or a social nightmare where who's really in charge here? And I suspect it's not more opportunity for abuse, but there's certainly a lot of opportunity for abuse there, and who's going to correct it at that point? Yeah, that's the other hand. Yeah.
How would you respond to a parent who says, "I am my kid's pastor"?
Yeah, I would say
I
they're
hear that
not.
all the time.
Yeah, I would say no. You're your kid's parent. But here's the thing: you have to usually when you hear something like that, there's two lines you have to walk down your head. One is, okay, does the Bible use that language? The answer is no. The answer is, okay, what have we begun to say in our English speech that might have a biblical message, but we've just morphed the word out? So, example would be the word worship. So I remember being in worship class, which is talking about worship, and worship is a noun; it's not a verb. But everyone calls it a verb now. Worship is a noun historically, which just means it is the experience of awe and transcendence as you go to the corporate space. And what happened is people started to use the word worship for all kinds of things. One person in class, as I was a student, he might have, I don't know to what extent he really believed this, but he said, because I help set up and break down the chairs in service, because I feel like that's when I'm worshiping God. And I was in the back going, so by yourself with there's no what you feel is a sense of calling to support. I mean, but again, there's biblical language for what he was feeling, but he was using this other word in that sense. That's very common. When a parent is saying, I'm my kid's pastor, what they mean is I'm their shepherd and their discipler, which is not bad language. But, I mean, pastoring is specific called leaders, presbyteros, elders, who were called out of even the regular folks to shepherd at the big level, at the corporate level. And to that extent, not everyone meets the qualifications to be that pastor. I mean, there's lots of debates, of course, about men and women in the role of pastor, but I would point out not all men are allowed to be pastors, according to Paul either, depending on how you want to read that, how you want to unpack that, rather, in the modern context. And so what you end up having is the situation where if you use pastor for everything, pastor means nothing. Just like if you use the word worship for everything, then actual worship is nothing. It's just, it becomes a wax nose. You can apply it to anything. So I would use it in that context, say like, hey, yeah, you're shepherding them, you're discipling them. You're probably not going to get them not to say otherwise. And you have to make the judgment call. The times that, let's say if this were me, I would be concerned is if the parent is the helicopter parent that won't leave them alone, and it's kind of like, well, I got a tape of your message, and I'm not happy with that, so I told my child about all the things I thought you were wrong on. If you get that kind of a relationship going, and I'm suspecting this might be that case, I don't know, that's a problem. Because what they're saying more is my child's pope. I'm
exactly what I'm talking about. Like,
yeah.
if I'm saying, like, this is our standard, this is what God's word says, and then they come and they go, well, I'm my kid's youth pastor. But
Yeah.
they're not aligning up. Like, if the kid's sleeping around with something, like, this isn't, but
Yeah.
are messing around, doing something they shouldn't do.
Yeah.
And they come in, well, don't confront my kid, I'm their pastor.
Yeah, it's at this point that you usually remind them that their membership vows were that they would actually listen to the leadership of the church. That's usually the most effective reminder. Yeah. They were members, yeah. And to just say, well, to go back to the discipline point, at a very micro level at this point, you can invite them just not to participate. Because that's the challenge, is it's the parents basically want you to knuckle under. I'm gonna probably be my read on this situation. And if you don't, and if you just stay out of it personally, they will go. Usually, in some cases, they'll go personal. Well, you don't know what you're doing. You're just a kid, and they call you names. If you just remain cold as ice about it, in the sense of don't take it personal, what they're bucking against is the demands of the gospel, the demands of the New Testament, not you. And so it's not personal, even if they try to make it that way. And what they want is to get a rise out of you to begin with, because then they can justify that it's being personal and it's just you and you're just an idiot. But if you say, look, this is the standard, you don't have to come, it's cool. Like just like I disagree, but that's fine. That's honestly I have seen that in numerous cases work to great effect, because suddenly the blustering about I'm not coming back, suddenly the kid's back the next week and they don't say anything, and the parent stays out of it. Because the kid goes, what are you talking about? You got me kicked out of youth group. It's my favorite time. And that whole thing. And I hate you, Mom. That's the whole thing. No kids ever said that, right? But no. But if you just always stay out of it, they're fighting against the demands of the gospel, not you.
Yeah.
That's the way to look at it. Yeah.
From a pastoral perspective on that, I've engaged a lot of that. I found the win for me has always been to value your family and their biblical setup rather than the institution of the church.
Yeah.
Developing. So when a parent has approached me with something like that, I've shown genuine concern that it sounds like you are biblically starved for a pastor that can shepherd you. Would you like me to make some phone calls? Would you like me to find a place for you and your family
Yeah.
Yourself and your family under the authority of.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I either find that they recant, saying, no, we're comfortable here. And it's like, okay, well, I mean,
Yeah.
I just need you to biblically function as an appropriate family structure and be cared for and loved. And so when I value their entity and say, if it's not here, that's a God thing. I'd love
Yeah.
to help you find where that is.
Yeah.
Has always been a win for me, and generally a time that you see them happen.
Yeah. And there was this issue with families and stuff. I do think, just to make sure we're very clear, I think there's two tendencies in evangelical churches, and you can run this across different setups as well. If you're a program-driven church that has lots of opportunities, the joke is of the mega church that has a micro community small group for every, for basket weaving teens that like goth music, that kind of thing. Like, that's our Bible study for that over there. Every group has their own silo. And the problem is what ends up happening on this side is you have something that is, overly individualistic, which is that you have the family unit of mother, father, and then 3.5 kids is the average in the house of this world. And what ends up happening is ministries will divide them up. So you have the men's group, you have the women's group, you have the toddlers group, and then you have this age range, and this age range, and this age range. And so they're all broken up into 900 different things, and they don't feel like a family unit at church. They never worship together, they don't go to church. And this is the world I grew up in for at least until about 4th grade. We lived in Lakeland. There was an entirely different church for the kids. The parents would drop them off, and then they would go, and it was two massively separate buildings. And so you had this very much, so how was church today, son? Kind of feeling like, good, I guess. I don't know. I don't have any context to talk to you about it because you weren't there with me and they didn't know what happened. That's a problem that is usually resisted by some of the stuff you've heard today, which is, I'm my child's pastor. No, you don't break my family up. That kind of thing will sometimes hiccup in there. The other side is, I think this is a bit of a straw man. You have to be a massively large church to really break the family up this much. What happens over here is, I don't even know what title to give it, but you have this idea that where you have church and family. And in resisting this, people elevate the family to be almost its own church, its own entity unto itself. And it's that same "don't tread on me, don't tell me what to do" kind of instinct in a lot of ways. It's, I'm my child's pastor, I'm responsible for everything, I do this, I'm the head. Well, what the problem is on this is not that they care about their family, of course. These people care about their family too, they just don't realize what they're instinctively doing sometimes by separating them to different parts of the church. What happens over here is nobody can correct the family. It's siloed off. And therefore, even Paul couldn't come in and say, husbands or father of this family, you're actually not doing very well. Because it's, don't come to me, don't talk to me, I know what I'm doing. It's the illusion of that the family is itself sanctified. It's strange enough Pelagian. And I think it's this problem of individualism at just a family unit level. Now, again, is it the worst thing possible? No. But there has become an almost fetish of the family. I've used that word twice this weekend. But there's almost this sense of the family is itself holy and not and incapable of needing correction. When in fact, some of the worst things that Paul has to address are problems of the family. And some of the most painful and hurtful places where people need to have correction is in the family. One of the challenges, though, is the instinct to separate the family from the church and the instinct to be individualistic has, again, led to this lack of correction that is completely against the history of the church. So when people look at the Reformation time, one of the things that was very common is they had these church courts, and everyone hates these things today. They're like, oh, church courts. And yeah, there are completely crazy things that happen in some of these church courts where, somebody's hauled up because they haven't been to church for 2 weeks in a row. And I was like, sorry, I have the Black Death plague, I couldn't be there. No, I'm just kidding. But you get that kind of thing. The other thing they would do, though, is haul up deadbeat dads and say, we know what you're doing, and here's a warning. And now we would lose our minds if anyone tried to, do that, and it's within that, at least within that structure. This idea of putting them seemingly on trial for this. Now, they wouldn't be thrown in jail for it, but they'd be warned. They'd be censured. The problem in our individualistic world is people are prone to run. And they can vote with their feet, and they can vote with their wheels, and they can leave. And so what that means for the believer in the church is that they have an isolationism within themselves. But that's my problem with the situation on the right, is I think it's the same isolationism, but just with my family. I mean, even if you got like 9 kids, it's still not a massively large group of people. And mostly it's the 2 parents that want to isolate themselves. I don't find many kids saying, you know what, Dad, let's be a family unit church unto ourselves. It's one or both parents that are driving it. They want to just kind of pull away from actual pastoral leadership. But the isolationism piece comes up. And this is, yeah.
About the individual, I want to run it by you because it's something, but I'm going to get it all out.
Yeah.
My opinion is, before time, they say Satan tried to take over heaven. See, I'm going to take him to the place, and the devil, Michael kicked him out, and the enemy sneaks in, and he plants terror. So isn't that individualism kind of coming from that place? Imagine you want to take over, you want to run something?
At its extreme, yeah, an individualism like that is the very opposite of the biblical idea of the family of God, the church of God, one body with all the different diverse members. Absolutely, it's like that. At some instinct, though, it's like an irrational fear of a child. My daughter has, until very recently, been stupidly afraid of anything that looks like fire or electricity. And the reason why is because when she was 3, it's basically my fault now. My wife had left the iron on in the master bathroom and was sitting on nothing around it was flammable. It was sitting on like a countertop, like a marble countertop or something, or granite, whatever it was. And it says there's nothing was going to happen, but it was still on. It's like the classic "don't leave the iron on" thing. And I walked out and this had made a joke. Said, "I left the iron on. You're going to burn the house down." Well, my daughter is now like, ah! Like the whole, like everything is like she would not go near a kitchen. Like, you know how you turn the oven on and like you let it heat up? Like if you go to then use the restroom or like check your email or something, she's like, "Daddy, what are you doing? Daddy, the stove's on, Daddy." Like this whole thing. And then lightning got added to the mix because we live in Florida, and my wife one time was raining really hard. She pulled up to our garage, and I walked out to kind of receive them into my arms as they ran from the van into the garage. So the worst situation ever happened. So the automatic door slides open, they get out, start running. And I've lived in Florida basically all my life. Like the loudest lightning crack you've ever heard happened. I mean, it must have been like 4 houses down. Well, bang! And it was just like, bah! And they came running in, and we have epoxy laid down on the garage floor. It's not concrete. Which now when it gets wet, they start running and then they go whoop, boom, like on the back of their head. Like, all right, I'll go ahead and get a counselor for you. But so my daughter's been very much afraid. It's an irrational fear. If the electrician comes to the house to fix, add a wall socket or something, it's what's wrong? Is there something wrong? Is there something wrong? So I think the individualism of a lot of people is an irrational fear that a corporate identity or belonging to a large group is some kind of man-made religion some kind of Catholic belief that the building and the people and the church and the budget matters. And so I think that's a good fear to have, but it becomes irrational and it sees problems at every corner. It becomes almost a conspiracy theory. With that, it just takes correction and teaching them the scriptural point. God's not about just saving you to go be by yourself in a corner. He's about saving you towards the body and coming together. And in fact, this passage in Hebrews is a great example. It says, and let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. What seems to have happened in the early church is people had just said, now that Christ is victorious, I don't need to go to anything anymore. And they said, here the encouragement is, don't do that. Don't give up as some are in the habit of doing. But rather, what the goal of our coming together is for mutual encouragement and to spur one another on. And that's just one passage. There are others. Obviously, if Paul writes almost in every other epistle of the New Testament, writes its letters to the church as a corporate body, the assumption is that there's going to be a corporate body at every point in the church's history. But again, I think it's an irrational fear. Is it 10? Okay. Yeah, I noted it said 25. I was like, wait, there's not 25 in Hebrew, so I took one. I didn't even check. But that's fine. It's like Revelation 23. There's some horror movie that was based on like another chapter in Revelation that had been lost. They rediscovered it. It was awesome. It was a bad movie, but it was an awesome plot. All right, authority and governance. What time is it here? Okay. Well, we'll go for one more minute. I'll lay out the basics, and then we'll take a break before we come back and yell about our governance structures. So authority and governance. How do we arrange ourselves biblically? And I think that's the important question, is how do you do this biblically? One of the challenges in the evangelical church is that we, for whatever reason, it's like some of us assume that the Bible doesn't seem to either directly give or at least indicate the basic structures of leadership in the church overall. One of the things I'll point out, though, is that in all of the governance structures that we're going to talk about, every single one of them has offices and roles in the church that are not biblical, or not unbiblical, but are extra scriptural, right? Meaning, you have people on staff usually that, Acts chapter 8 doesn't say, and then they called the first worship leader, and the worship leader shall be this, and called thus, and this kind of thing. All the structures have taken the implications of how they're reading scripture and usually fleshed it out. But these are the basics. There are those that are based on bishops, those that are based on synods or councils is probably the better word. Synod is sometimes loses its meaning. But a group, the synod of leadership. And then those based on the local church alone. Even that's a bit of a misnomer because it's not based on the local church. It's usually based on the leadership of that local church. And one of the stressors is how do you choose that leadership? All right. Let's, since this is not really anything worth questioning, let's take a break and we'll come back and I'll unpack this more.